Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation and time to learn, appreciate, and honor God's creation together. So I'm here today as the director of Blessed Tomorrow to invite you into learning more about how we can care for God's creation today to ensure a healthy, bright future for ourselves, our families, our neighbors, and all of God's creation. And as a mom of two, soon to be three girls, I really care deeply about their futures, and I want to do all that I can to see that they're able to live in a world that's healthy, that's safe, and secure. And perhaps you too have a personal connection to God's creation. So I hope you'll join me in learning more and taking action together. The content I'm going to cover today has been developed in collaboration with many faith traditions and institutions and my organization, Blessed Tomorrow, which is a coalition of diverse religious partnerships working to advance ambitious climate solutions in faithful service to God, to restore creation and to seek justice for all. And because this talk is recorded, I would invite you to pause and take a moment to write down a part of God's creation, a person, a place, or creature that gives you joy and restores your spirit. I think it's really important for us to stay grounded in why we are grateful and how we experience joy in God's creation. So hold on to that important connection as we continue through the presentation today. And for further thought or devotional reflection, maybe consider parts of God's creation that you wish to restore. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I'm here to help empower you to make a difference by learning what our faith teaches us about caring for creation, what we need to know about our changing environment and the climate, the impacts to ourselves, our families, our neighbors, near and far, and all of creation, and really specifically and most importantly, ways that we can move solutions forward through our actions and through advocacy. So let's go ahead and dive into how our faith calls us to care for creation, like what we need to know about our changing climate, how it impacts God's creation, ourselves, our neighbors, and the ministry priorities or priorities of our own congregations that we might value. So it's helpful for us to understand your awareness and attitudes on creation care and the concept of our changing climate before we get started. So I want you to consider answers to these questions. So what is causing our changing climate? Is it mostly nature, mostly humans, both? Maybe you don't know. Burning fossil fuels is mostly okay for people in nature, mostly unhealthy for people in nature. Maybe you're not sure. How concerned are you about climate change? A lot, moderate, a little, maybe not at all? And can you make a difference? Do you think you can or not? Or maybe you don't know. I suspect we have a variety with us today, but I'll talk more in a moment about the fact that most of us are concerned about our changing climate. And while some of us are more concerned than others, I think we really can all agree that we are called to care for creation. And so the point of this session today, again, is that we can learn and share together. So what are the most important things for us to keep in mind when talking about creation care in the context of this changing climate? First, climate change is a moral issue. We are called by our faiths to care for each other, for all of God's creation. Those of us who are most vulnerable are the first to suffer and also the least responsible for the damage that we see around us. We've all noticed that our world is changing. Flowers bloom earlier, coastlines are shifting, and weather patterns are more extreme. Our climate is becoming less stable and our neighbors are suffering. And these changes are harmful. They can damage our health, destabilize communities, and burden our budgets. And this is especially true of low-income families, some communities of color, those living with disabilities, older adults, and our children. But we can lead. We have a moral responsibility to be good stewards and to make moral choices for the good of all creation, to live out our faith by working towards the health of our environment. And we can make a difference by reducing energy use and moving towards clean energy sources like wind and solar. We can prepare for the changes to our climate and advocate for just solutions on behalf of ourselves and our communities. And we're not alone. Individuals, organizations, governments, and businesses from around the world are also leading on this issue. And that's because climate solutions help everyone in some way. While some solutions do require investment, Over time, we improve our health, we generate new businesses and jobs, we save money, we even grow our economy, and we address inequities and work for justice for those most impacted when we embrace solutions. So I'm going to talk about how climate change impacts us locally and our existing ministry or mission work within our faith traditions. But first, let's talk about how climate change is impacting people, our society, and our natural world at a big picture. You considered your own perspectives, but let's look at where Americans are generally on this issue. Eco-America's research shows that Americans of all stripes are very concerned about climate change. 79% of Americans are concerned, 48% are very concerned. So if you add in the number of those who are just a little concerned, that's 92% of us. That's a big number. But despite the high level of concern, only 59% of Americans believe others around them are concerned. So this is importantly, more than twice as many people are very concerned than believe that's to be the case, right? And this means that most Americans feel alone in their concern about climate change. And the gap in actual versus perceived concern might be contributing to silence on this issue. And it really points to the increasingly urgent need for visible leadership and public discourse and for us to raise our voices. So let's dive into how our faith calls us to care for creation, and again, what we know specifically about what's happening. All right, so global warming pollution is caused primarily by just one thing: people burning fossil fuels for heat and energy. When we burn fossil fuels like petroleum, coal, and methane, it produces greenhouse gas emissions, primarily carbon dioxide or CO2. And that makes our atmosphere thicker. It holds in more heat and the planet gets warmer. Here in the United States, there are 5 major contributors to this pollution. Transportation, it's responsible for the largest share at 29%. This is things like burning fossil fuels for cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes. Electricity production generates another 28%. And we've been shifting to renewable energy over the past decade, but about 63% of our electricity still comes from burning coal and methane. 22% comes from industry burning fossil fuels, mostly to make things like steel, aluminum, and concrete. And emissions from businesses and homes are another 12%. And agricultural emissions from livestock, agricultural soils, it is the remaining 9% in the US. So note the differences in global outputs, where agriculture is a much larger contributor and transportation is much lower. So that's what's driving our problem. It's really burning fossil fuels in these areas. And I want to look at the impacts next. The primary result of all of our carbon pollution is that the Earth is getting warmer. This animation we'll play in a moment from NASA illustrates how our planet has warmed since 1880, about when we started burning fossil fuels at scale. It warms slowly at first, but as we burn more, it warms much more rapidly over the past couple of decades. So we'll go ahead and play the video. You can see here, the temperatures are starting to warm globally, especially as we get into the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You can see this more rapid warming happening now, especially as we reach today. In fact, 2011 to 2020 was the warmest decade on record in a persistent long-term climate change trend. The warmest 6 years on record have all been the past 6 years, with 2016. So the primary result of all of our carbon pollution is that the Earth is getting warmer. And this animation from NASA illustrates how our planet has warmed since 1880, about when we started burning fossil fuels at scale. It warms slowly at first, but as we burn more, it warms much more rapidly over the past couple of decades. So we'll play the video now. In fact, 2011 to 2020 was the warmest decade on record in a persistent long-term climate change trend. And the warmest 6 years on record have all been the past 6 years, with 2016, 2019, and 2020 being the top 3. So the human activities that we've discussed already have caused that warming. And you can see those numbers go up here. So the primary result of all of our carbon pollution is that the Earth is getting warmer. And this animation from NASA illustrates how our planet has warmed since 1880, about when we started burning fossil fuels at scale. It warms slowly at first, but as we burn more, it warms much more rapidly over the past couple of decades. So we'll play the video now. In fact, 2011 to 2020 was the warmest decade on record in a persistent long-term climate change trend. And the warmest 6 years on record have all been the past 6 years, with 2016, 2019, and 2020 being the top three. And the human activities that we discussed before, they've caused that warming. You can see here in a moment how quickly the trend ticks up. So this here is a series of helpful visuals to understand how burning more and more fossil fuels raises the global temperature, which causes more intense and frequent extreme weather, which causes more billion-dollar disasters that impact us in really every way. So the graph at the top left shows our 40-fold increase in emissions since 1920 from burning solid, liquid, and gas fossil fuels, which thickens the atmosphere, trapping warmth like a blanket and increases planetary temperatures. So the graph at the lower left shows the increase in planetary temperatures over the past century, about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Those warmer temperatures are causing more frequent and intense disasters, So the more and larger wildfires, floods, storms, and droughts that we're seeing, they're really happening all around us. In fact, from 1980 to 2015, America averaged $6 billion climate weather event disasters a year. That's adjusted for inflation. And for the most recent 5 years, 2016 to 2020, we are averaging 16 of those events. And we can see the connection between rising pollution and temperature. We've learned about how this causes more intense and frequent extreme weather and longer-term impacts like sea level rise, drought, and wildfires. But where are climate changes and disasters impacting us? Well, in 2020, there were 22 weather climate disaster events, with losses exceeding $1 billion, each to affect the United States. You can see the severe storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes in the South and Midwest here. These are usually a day or two long, but the little dots for the wildfires and drought, they really understate the scale of these types of disasters. Wildfires out west are lasting weeks to months, burning forests and towns over many millions of acres. And the droughts in the Southwest are lasting for years and setting new records for duration and damages. And overall, these have massive economic effects, from damage to property values to loss of infrastructure and jobs in those impacted areas. I live here in the Northeast near Washington, D.C., and as you can see, the impacts here, they might be different than those in the West or the South or the Midwest. We're already and expect to see even more extreme weather events. We're seeing warmer temperatures and sea level rise. And these changes will impact many areas of life, including industries like farming and coastal tourism. But right now, I want to specifically look at how these impacts affect the faith values and the areas of ministry or priority that we already care about and have invested ourselves in over time within our faith traditions. So as people of faith, we're motivated to act on all sorts of issues by our love for God, for our neighbors, and all of God's creation. Climate change, it's a global phenomenon which affects almost every one of these concerns. So for example, if you care about people having access to safe drinking water, having enough healthy food to eat, if you're worried about refugees and other migrants, if you're concerned about increasing violence and war, then you care about climate change. If you're concerned about poverty, racial justice, women and children, you care about climate change. You care about health and well-being and prosperity, you care about climate change. And while climate change impacts us all, again, low-income communities, communities of color, children, the elderly, and those with limited language proficiency are some of the most vulnerable. So climate change is exacerbating existing inequities, And therefore, climate change is an issue of justice. And we really must help ourselves and those around us understand these connections. Let's dive a little bit deeper. People of faith often have rich traditions of serving those among us who are hungry. And our efforts to do this are becoming and will continue to become harder as we respond to climate change. We know that rising CO2 levels actually decrease the nutritional value of food, including decreasing protein, iron, and calcium found. Climate change disrupts our growing practices, our food transport systems, and threatens the overall security of our food system. And the prevalence of undernourished people, it tends to be higher in countries and places highly exposed to climate extremes. We know that climate change exacerbates income inequality. If you care about poverty, you care about climate. Those who have the means to recover from these extreme weather events and disasters, they can. And those who don't are unable to recover and suffer the consequences of relocation, loss of property, loss of employment, etc. So resiliency, being resilient to climate change is income dependent, and that is unfair and therefore a justice issue. And if we say we care about peace and conflict, we care about climate change. What does increased migration and scarcity of resources create? It creates competition for those resources and jobs, which may lead to violence. Formerly separated groups are brought together, which can lead to cultural tension. Strain on social institutions increases the probability of criminal behavior. Trauma and stress strain social relationships and a sense of community well-being. For instance, there have been multiple reports that suggest that the civil war, for example, in South Sudan, is at least partially attributed to climate change because of the extreme weather conditions and the competition for resources. And as the visible impacts of climate change grow and impact ever more people, the mental health impacts are also growing, as I alluded to. If it doesn't impact your health directly and immediately, going through these major climate change catastrophes and disasters can cause chaos in your personal life and your community. And there's not much one can do about wildfires, hurricanes, and floods, except flee. And after the event, you might find yourself without a home, your cherished memories and possessions, a community, or even a loved one. It's not easy to rebuild your life under these conditions, and the stress and depression can result in things like substance abuse or even violence. And again, if we care about race and racism and the unity of humanity, as often our faith traditions call us into, we care about climate. The term environmental racism was coined in 1982 by the former executive director of the United Church of Christ, a person of faith, the Commission on Racial Justice. His name is Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis, and he's a very strong leader in this movement. And when we talk about climate impacts, we really must start with a mindset grounded in equity and build from there. As recent headlines have reminded us, and as COVID-19 has really sharply revealed, we have had centuries of unequal policymaking and enforcement and implementation, which serve to bake these inequities into our systems. And these inequities disproportionately impact Black and Brown people, spanning so many areas of their lives, including education, housing, jobs, health, safety, and so much more. And this is what is meant by the term systemic racism. It negatively impacts all aspects of our society and gets in the way of solutions. And so we, as people of faith, as those who care deeply about environmental justice, we also must work actively against racism, both personal and systemic, in order to dismantle it. We can all do this, and we will harken back to these concepts throughout the solutions section and then later in our presentation. So let's look at an issue that I know that you and your congregation may care about specifically, and that may be access to clean water. So if we care about access to clean water and the diseases and suffering brought by flooding from hurricanes, storms, and sea level rise, then again, we care about climate change. And we know that issues such as dehydration from drought, waterborne disease, and the inability to recover from flooding and prepare for extreme weather events, it's more prevalent among already vulnerable communities, including among communities of color and Indigenous communities. So here where I live locally in Fairfax County, Virginia, we are not immune to climate impacts. As I mentioned earlier, the Northeast is already experiencing stronger storms related to climate shifts. A single storm in 2019 cost Fairfax County $14 million. That's money that could have been spent on other county services, on programs and projects. And failing to produce long-term solutions is going to exacerbate the risks to members of our community who we love, who are already vulnerable due to the poverty and chronic health issues they face. So changes to our climate impact nearly every aspect of our lives, the lives of our neighbors near and far. It disrupts nature, our own health, our society, and our economy. And some of us are unfairly harmed more than others. Let's start with nature. We take nature for granted. We think it's always been there, it always will be there, and it can take care of us. It doesn't change. For the past 40,000 years or so, this has been true. But as we learned earlier, the carbon pollution we're creating is changing the temperature and chemistry of our air and water. Nature provides what scientists call ecosystem services. All of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat are provided by nature, God's creation. And climate change changes nature and disrupts those ecosystem services. Too much or too little water, volatile temperatures and weather, air pollution that we breathe. And burning fossil fuels and creating pollution and climate change, it threatens us directly. The most direct impact is on our health. And the climate change impacts of nature and on our health, they all cost money, threatening local economies and jobs. And so the combination of all of these problems affects our safety and security. And again, the greatest burden of all of this is on people who didn't cause the problem. So I know that was a lot of background, context, and maybe some heavy things. But the really good news is that climate solutions are here and they can benefit all of us. So what motivates us to do this, to care for God's creation? And how does our pollution cause the climate to change, impacting nature and all of us, both here and locally around the globe? We've talked about this, and it's time to talk about the good news. They're here today, climate solutions. We have the technology, the ideas, the systems in place to help address climate change, but we need public support, all of us, and the political resolve in order to do it. And we can do it. We can only scratch the surface of this today. There are many more resources available, and I just always would encourage you to visit blessedtomorrow.org to learn more. But let's dive in. So when we talk about solving climate change, we have two basic problems we need to deal with. We're burning fossil fuels for heat and energy. We're polluting the planet and causing climate change that way. And we're destroying nature. We're ruining forests and grasslands and waters that sustain us. But again, there are solutions to address each part of this. We can electrify so much in our communities and personal lives. We can move to clean and renewable energy. We can restore thriving nature all around us. And we update our farming practices in ways that heal the land. So again, there's so much we can do to implement these solutions. Here are some major categories of climate solutions. Things like clean energy, which includes wind and solar. And also included in this category can be things like hydroelectric, geothermal, and others such as solar thermal. You might hear those terms. Energy efficiency includes large-scale efficiency in buildings, the electric grid, as well as in our households. And natural solutions include reforestation, greening of infrastructure, native planting, low-emission farming techniques, things like biocarbon, and many others. Climate policy includes regulations, performance standards, incentives, market-based mechanisms, community choice energy, or the ability to choose clean energy. It's an example of a local climate policy that's providing both climate and economic benefits. Transportation includes high miles per gallon vehicles and electric vehicles, more efficient or electrified air, train, and shipping methods, and public transportation. And personal behaviors include a mixture of all of the above, but on a personal scale, plus reducing consumption and reducing waste, active transportation such as biking and walking, and even your diet choices. So we just talked earlier about climate change vulnerabilities. all the ways that climate change makes our lives less stable, less secure, and less fair. But there's so much that we can do that really bring the needed benefits to these same problems. Addressing climate change has a myriad of benefits to all of us personally, including things like reducing air pollution, which improves our health, creating jobs through development and deployment of new clean energy, improving our energy security by producing energy locally versus importing it from foreign countries. And we can reduce our energy and fuel bills as efficiency means we use less and clean energy costs continue to decrease. Efficient transportation can reduce urban pollution and traffic jams. And we can improve water quality by preventing pollution and adapting infrastructure to be more resilient in the face of flooding and natural disasters. We can sustain biodiversity on the planet, and we can protect ourselves and our communities from the worst impacts of increased, again, intensity and frequency of things like extreme heat and weather. Some people might think that wasting less energy, using clean energy, and restoring nature are nice ideas, but we can't make enough or afford expensive wind and solar energy. But for 5 or 10 years ago, they were almost right. We had to subsidize clean energy because it costed more than fossil fuels. Today, the opposite's true. And this chart shows that wind and solar energy costs have declined so much that they are now our cheapest sources of energy. And we have to subsidize coal and methane to make them competitive. So less expensive renewable energy, it's like a digital camera versus an old camera film. No waste, many more new good paying jobs, and savings that we can spend on things like housing, education, health, safety, and recreation. And the dramatic shift from polluting fossil fuels to clean energy and utility scale electricity, it's happening in transportation too. Remember, transportation is the largest contributor to climate pollution in America. Remember, it was 29%. So more efficient transportation. So the more efficient our transportation, the more effective ways to mitigate and stop climate change. Things from public transportation to electrification of cars, buses, scooters and bikes, ride and bike sharing, and active transportation, purchase and use of electric vehicles are all experiencing exponential growth, while traditional internal combustion engines are in a decline. And most of the big car manufacturers in the world have announced that they will stop making fossil fuel cars by 2030. Electric bikes and scooters are all the rage in cities right now. UPS, Amazon, and FedEx have ordered hundreds of thousands of clean delivery vehicles that will save them money. Clean transportation benefits included reducing air pollution, traffic congestion, and road fatalities, and greater social cohesion. And there's probably an electric car in your future, whether yours or the cars you ride in. And quite frankly, the sooner the better. And we can protect and restore nature. So when we destroy nature, it does a few things. It causes the planet to warm, as we've discussed. All the carbon in the soils, the plants and trees go into the atmosphere when we cut them down or burn them. It causes pollution, chemical changes that pollute our air and water, which harms our health and kills nature. And it destroys God's creation and the beautiful world around us. But nature restores us. Pollution, it's dirty, ugly, and kills us. So when we stop burning and polluting, nature jumps back in and tries to help us restore a healthy, thriving planet. Natural climate solutions help to reduce pollution and even begin to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So restoring nature restores us, restores our communities and the planet. And we need to protect existing forests, grasslands, and waterways, and heal those that we've damaged or destroyed. And we can improve our agricultural practices so that we don't degrade soils and water. Things like minimal tillage, crop diversity, and integrating livestock with crops can provide us with healthier, tastier food. Protecting and restoring nature is something that we can all do in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and beyond. So most importantly, we need to address this issue with policymakers. We need to support any measures that preserve or restore lands and waterways. The other huge benefit to protecting and restoring nature is that it really helps with climate change. So as the chart shows, in the US, nature has the potential to remove 21% of our carbon pollution. That's the equivalent to removing emissions from all cars and trucks currently on the road today. The benefits of caring for creation through natural solutions and restoration, again, are vast. Restoring forests, enhancing biodiversity, restoring habitats, protects us from soil erosion, it makes our air cleaner and purer, protects us against flooding and storms, and reverses the multitude of negative effects caused or exacerbated by climate change. We're also happier and less stressed when we spend time in nature. And by replanting our forests, we're helping to make more space for you and me and our neighbors around the country to find peace of mind, especially those who currently do not have access to green spaces. So while we've been working on climate solutions for decades now, we continue to emit more and more carbon pollution each year, making things worse and worse. And why is that? How do we achieve successful climate solutions now? Well, these are three principles that we think ensure success. First and foremost is justice. So rich people don't live next door to polluting power plants and highways. It's the lower income people and communities who do, and this may be you or your family. And it's not their or our fault. It's not right and it's not fair that we and they and our and their children get sick from pollution that benefits us all. We need to make sure each American has the same access to clean air and water and thriving nature. Second is ambition. In the past, we've set halfway steps and goals, but unfortunately failed to achieve them. And we need to set goals that will quickly stop, then reverse climate change. And we need to pass laws and provide incentives to make sure they happen within years, not decades. The third is nature, what many of us call climate restoration. Nature has always supported human well-being, and we can keep steadily destroying our waters, lands, and air. We're making nature sick, and we need to heal it if we want to keep us to stay on track and make sure we're taking care of ourselves. We need to restore thriving nature. So each of us can be a part of the solution set. We can make it a part of our daily lives. We can advocate for it in our communities, our worship spaces, and with policymakers. And again, as we consider how to build resilience in the face of climate change, how we reduce our carbon emissions and restore nature, our transition in this direction must be just for those who are currently dependent on the fossil fuel industry. So what is a just transition? What does it look like? It's a society where the burdens of the transition, things like retraining workers, remediating toxified lands, building new infrastructures and technologies, that those are shared fairly across groups. And likewise, a just transition requires that the benefits of transitioning to clean, renewable source systems and sources, things like vibrant communities and wild spaces, economic benefits, and employment opportunities are also shared equitably. Families, small businesses, and communities across the country are dependent on income, tax revenue, and the infrastructure investments of the fossil fuel industry. So our transition to clean energy, sustainable building and agricultural practices, and more sustainable transportation cannot leave these families and communities behind. Here again, locally where I am in Fairfax County, Virginia, we have several exciting solutions moving forward that we can all get involved with. First, Fairfax County is creating their community-wide energy and climate action plan. It's a first ever greenhouse gas emission reduction plan. It includes goals to define a path forward for the county residents, businesses, organizations, and others to reduce our collective emissions. There are currently several working groups meeting to do this work, and community involvement and input is critically important to its success. So you can visit the CCAP webpage at fairfaxcounty.gov to find more information about getting involved. Secondly, Fairfax County is simultaneously developing a comprehensive climate adaptation and resilience plan for the county. And this includes identifying risks and vulnerabilities and strategies to adapt to and prepare for those impacts. There's a community advisory group for this as well that you can get involved with. And you can visit the Resilient Fairfax webpage at fairfaxcounty.gov to learn more and get involved. And finally, we have a wonderful faith-based organization working on these issues right here in our community. I'm an active member and serve on the board of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, and we support local people of faith and entire congregations to work toward and advocate for zero carbon emissions through things like transportation, net zero carbon emission schools, climate planning like the CCAP plan, increasing our tree canopy, reducing waste, and facilitating funding and financing for sustainability efforts. And again, you can get involved by visiting faithforclimate.org. So what can we do as individuals and congregations of faith in addition to what I just mentioned? There are 3 ways that we care for creation. We're good stewards of God's gifts and provision. We care for our neighbors and prepare and adapt to ensure that they are safe places for us to live, work, play. And we bear witness to the world of how creation suffers, and we can call others to act for a safe, healthy, and just world for all. So here are some key ways that we can act today. We can make a difference in our congregations. First, I would encourage us to be thankful for the goodness of God in creation and to pray for guidance in the ways that we pray within our faith tradition. We can find support in and talk with our congregation. Building buy-in for sustainable practices that reduce emissions is key. You can assemble a creation care team of lay people, facility management staff, your clergy, and other community leaders. And you can plan using the Blessed Tomorrow Moving Forward Guide. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. You can make a public congregational commitment. So you're showing your congregation and the broader community that you're committed to this work. You can make an example of yourselves and invite others to join you. You can get started on visible, inexpensive, and easy changes. These will help you build successes early and help people understand the impact right away. And roll those savings forward. As you save money from these early practices, you can take those savings and invest them in bigger projects like efficient windows, efficient HVAC systems, or even solar panels. And communicate and build on your success. Again, we'll take a look at the Moving Forward Guide resources for you to do this. So some of us find it helpful to see a roadmap for this kind of action. And here's an example of moving toward 100% clean energy by 2030 as a congregation or a household. First, you can get a baseline for your energy use. Do what you can when you can. Second, you can conserve energy and lower your emissions by up to 30%. Invest in your house of worship or your home with the potential to lower your emissions by another 30%. For example, in the congregation, there are certain settings on your thermostat that maximize energy use. You can put timers and sensors on the lighting so it goes off when no one is in the room. You can find ways for people in the building to save energy, which saves money. And again, roll those savings forward and invest in other improvements. Heating efficiency, air conditioning, making sure the building is properly insulated. While it is an investment, weatherization does save money. You can take it further. You can invest in renewable energy and get as close to zero carbon emissions as possible. And you can offset any remaining emissions. Things like planting trees and greenery helps to create shade and beautify, but also can help to offset those remaining emissions. Blessed Tomorrow offers our own carbon offset program powered by Cool Effect that you might check out as an option. So how can we think about becoming a refuge in the face of climate change? Again, we know climate change increases the frequency and intensity of weather-related disasters. It intensifies the impact and long-term damage of drought and sea level rise. And if we prepare to respond to these impacts while also reducing our impact and adapting and building back to be more resilient in the face of climate impacts, we actually create a refuge in the face of climate change within our own worship facility or our own home. So how can communities of faith create that refuge? Well, consider this process to implement in your own faith community or house of worship. You can assemble a team to assess risks from climate change in your area and develop and implement plans similar to what Fairfax County is doing here in Virginia. This might be, again, working with the existing green team, your building team, your congregational council, or just a few peers who support this work. And you can set goals to guide you in your adaptation to climate change. Maybe do you want to serve your community during a disaster? Do you want to help raise awareness and advocate for local policies that help to reduce the impacts from, again, those increased intensity and frequency of disasters, droughts, and sea level rise? Assess the risks facing your specific area. Each region of the country can expect unique impacts, and develop a plan by exploring your options and prioritizing. Maybe you need to reinforce a failing foundation in the face of more frequent flooding. Perhaps you can identify your congregation as a cooling center during heat waves, or a warming shelter during more extreme cold weather like we saw in Texas in the recent past. You can connect with congregants, local government, relief agencies, and your FEMA office. Make sure that others are involved in this work in your community and that they know that you're planning and want to coordinate and leverage resources. And communicate your plan to your own congregation and update it annually. Make sure they know that this is going on and that they are invited to participate. And just keep implementing your plan, again, starting with your highest priority action. And a final but most important way that we can take action in our local context is by bearing witness of these impacts with our friends, our family, our neighbors, our community, and most importantly right now, with policymakers and other decision makers who can make policy level changes that we need in order to reach our goals. Climate advocacy, it involves a spectrum of activities, and there's a level appropriate for any advocate, wherever you are, seasoned or just getting started. So let's go ahead and talk about what that looks like to take action. I invite you to join me in acting and advocating on our changing climate as a matter of our faith. Please preach, teach, and share your call to care for creation. When you can, reduce energy use and try to move towards clean energy sources like wind and solar. And vote your faith in climate values. Share news about climate change and solutions in social media. Maybe consider publishing a blog post or a newsletter article or something in your congregation's bulletin. Take it a step further. Submit an op-ed or a letter to the editor, to a newspaper or periodical, sharing your faith values, why you care for creation, and why you want others to join you in that. And sign on to letters supporting climate solutions. Call, write, or visit your elected officials. And consider attending local, state, or national candidate forums or other opportunities to share your message rooted in your own faith tradition. Again, here locally, we can act. I would encourage you to join like-minded local organizations and congregational efforts to collaborate with and increase energy efficiency in their own houses of worship, or programs through your local state energy efficiency office. Again, here in Fairfax County, that includes the CCAP plan, the Resilient Fairfax plan, and again, get involved with others doing this work. You're not alone. Here in Fairfax County, we have the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. You can join others to do this work together. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate the time you took to listen, and I would encourage you to consider these questions as you go forward. What have you learned? Was there something that surprised you? Was there something that uniquely resonated with you? How will you get more engaged? Maybe identify your own plan along that spectrum and develop a group plan, find others to join you. What do you want to learn more about? And how can we make this presentation better? We'd love to hear from you. So again, thank you for joining me today and letting me share this information with you. Your interest in this topic and your willingness to do something today and perhaps even more tomorrow to care for creation and address climate change, it will make a difference. Our voices matter, and we have a responsibility to care for each other and for the earth. So please be sure to follow Blessed Tomorrow and your own faith traditions, environmental or advocacy work, and others to continue learning and finding ways to engage. And you can reach out to me anytime for support and ideas. So I want to say thank you. I want to say God bless to you. And please, again, reach out if you have any questions. We're always here to answer them. God bless.